Fresh Economic Thinking podcast. New ideas and analysis with Dr. Cameron Murray and Jonathan Gadir. Hi listeners. So I have a friend with a physics degree who is just the smartest person I know. And he's very unique in his perspectives because he came from a background of real poverty. I know this because we went to school together. He's got a very shrewd view of how experts, as a class of people, have deep biases and push harmful outcomes onto people less powerful than themselves with no accountability. I'd like to read a Facebook post that my friend wrote in 2016 that came up recently in the Facebook memories. It's titled, "In Support of a Fuck-Up Levy." Taxes should be raised, including on the middle class, especially those with any kind of bureaucratic or commentariat, in the broadest sense, power. It should be a specific tax at a fixed percentage, like the Medicare levy, called, say, the fuck-up levy. That doesn't go into general revenue. Instead, it's put aside into a special fund for the inevitable day that their expertise or bureaucracy turns out to have been wrong, fucked up, and has fucked up the lives of others on a systemic scale. Then the money in the fuck-up fund can be used to pay for restorative justice for those whose lives were deleteriously affected by said fuck-up. As an example, it's been noted that neoliberal economists have gotten away scot-free despite fucking up on a grand scale with their bullshit theories. But it couldn't be just limited to neoliberal economists because the whole point is to build the fuck-up fund in advance of fuck-ups by experts whose fuck-ups will only become clear down the track. It's too late to raise fuck-up money when the fuck-up occurs. So since we can't be sure which branches of economics or other expertise will turn out to have fucked up in the future, all the experts need to pay the fuck-up levy. The argument surely extends to all social sciences, and surely to all sciences, and to all people with bureaucratic power. And rich people should be paying more tax anyway. All the people in charge during the stolen generations, past and present, fuck up levy. So just impose a fuck up levy on all middle class people and above. Basically, if you're in the large class of people with bureaucratic or other expert power over the rest of us, you should be paying now so that when you and your colleagues eventually fuck it all up, we have some prospect of putting our lives back together. Cameron, this is probably the longest intro I've ever done. How about you tell me about what you think?
Look, that's just a terrific rant, isn't it, Jonathan?
Yep.
Look, as an economist, obviously it hits home, and as a profession, economists are renowned for predicting 10 of the last 3 recessions. Like it's become an inside joke in the profession that we're not good experts. We're not good at predicting the future. So I very much feel for the sentiment that there is a class of people who have a lot of power and very little accountability for their actions and when they exercise that power. But that, I think it's always been the case. I do wonder if this would be a solution. What do you think?
There is a certain pattern that we see in different branches, including things like robo-debt, including medical research and so on, where the experts kind of push something kind of useful for them and their power and their status in society. And then later on, they kind of, when it turns out to have been wrong, they kind of pretend that they never said that thing. It's, we've moved on now.
Yes.
No one believes that now. Pretending that like they never said it, or that, that's all in the past, we've moved on from that now. And no one believes that anymore. But the damage has been done and there's no accountability.
Yeah. Well, you're totally right. And how interesting is that robo-debt example for listeners who aren't following? Australia's welfare system enacted an automated debt recovery algorithm that went and sent bills to all of the welfare recipients that didn't actually match the legal requirements. And so people were sent bills they didn't really owe because the algorithm was wrong. And we're having a Royal Commission, I believe, is it? A Royal Commission, Jonathan, at the moment?
Yep, that's right.
Into how that actually happened. And the people there giving evidence. These are senior bureaucrats with jobs that are well remunerated, lots of superannuation, lots of all the benefits. And they are saying things like, yes, I'm the director of this part of the welfare system, or I'm in charge. It's not really my job to check that what we're doing complies with the legislation.
Yeah.
They're saying things like this to the Royal Commission, saying, I didn't know if it complied, but is that really my job? I just went along for the ride. And yet, the whole point of their position is that they're an expert with some knowledge of the legislation and how to implement it efficiently. I mean, that's exactly what they're there for. And yet, when push comes to shove, there's really no accountability. So this will be a really interesting case study. Like, had we had a fuck up levy, perhaps we could have, paid back all these people that got sent these robo debt notices. There's justice in many ways, and that's definitely one of them.
And Cameron, we've had a lot of talk about this thing called the science in the last couple of years and the need to believe in it. And The Economist magazine and its podcast on science and tech this week has a major piece on the incredible scale of fraud in medical and scientific research. And it really shouldn't surprise anyone that if you create an incentive structure in academic jobs, which is publish or perish, that you end up totally corrupting scientific research. And even the British Medical Journal has published an editorial piece headlined, "Time to assume that health research is fraudulent until proven otherwise?" ?
Yeah, I actually heard about that. Now, is that author the former editor of the British Medical Journal as well? We should double check that.
It is, what's his name? It is Richard Smith, was the editor of the BMJ until 2004. Yes.
Yes. So isn't that just really saying something, that the guy who has read more medical journal articles than anybody probably on planet Earth is saying don't trust them because all the incentives are wrong, and they're basically, they're either they're lying to just get published, they're lying because they're paid by pharmaceutical companies and have other incentives. But you just cannot trust these experts. And this is if you're thinking about the institutional incentives of why your mate is completely justified in ranting about the fuck up levy, there are these institutional incentives, right, to respond to sort of play the game of being an expert without actually being right in an objective sense. And you can see how that just expands across disciplines, because all those journal articles, all the other doctors are reading them and trusting them and advising patients based on them. And so, they're sort of the unwitting participants, right?
Yeah.
When there are these bad incentives at key points along the way. And it's a bit of a shame. And, I'm going to bring up COVID again, because let's be honest, is there a bigger medical fuck up in the last 3 or 4 decades? Probably not. And what I mean by that is not so much medicines and the vaccine, although we've seen the vaccine did not live up to its promise in terms of stopping transmission and stopping COVID. But in terms of the public policy, the public health apparatus of locking down, closing borders, all this sort of stuff. I read a recent article by a Dr. Marty Makary, who was testifying to the Congress in the US. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And it said 10 myths told by COVID experts now debunked. Right? So essentially, these designated experts told lies, basically, for, it's not clear what, for social reasons, for institutional reasons, about things like, natural immunity is no good, right? Like, that's just clearly not not true, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone knew it then, but the experts had this institutional or social incentive to go along with it. And that just happens all too often. I see it as an academic and as an economist. Obviously, economics is very heavily influenced by financial interests in how we present our analysis of the economy. But it's true in academia. I do a lot of work in housing, and I've called it the housing industrial complex before, right?
Yeah.
These housing experts, they don't get rewarded for pushing for policy settings that solve housing problems. They get rewarded for having housing problems and being asked to come to conferences and tell people how great they are at researching these problems. And if there's no problems, they're not important anymore. And the very worst case of that happened to me about 6 years ago after I first released the book Game of Mates in 2017. And it's about grey corruption, right, in Australia's institutions. And I got a random phone call from a lady, and she said, "Hi, is this Cameron Murray? You don't know me. I work for a homelessness organization, and I'm studying social work, and I'm really trying to do my part. But I've been there for a year, and I've realized now that they don't want to solve homelessness. And it's really upsetting. And I don't know if anyone will understand except you. They are big into the appearance of solving homelessness. The CEO does the sleep out, where all the CEOs,
Oh, yeah.
sleep on a cardboard with their sleeping bags one night in winter to show how much they care. The CEO does that. We cook food for them, we give them clothes. But when the government asks us for input on policy to actually give people houses and get them off the street, everybody there seems to find excuses why that's not the right thing to do, because, if that happens, they're out of a job. Right. So they've got this huge incentive as an expert to sort of play this pretend game of being an expert. So I think we saw that in COVID, that incentive to be important as an expert. So, we've got to do this harsh thing because that's the only way I'll get my face on TV or get published. Because, COVID created this wave of academic publications about COVID policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the way you get your citations up, you get your publications up. So it's good academically. It's good for your reputation if your face is on the news. People go, "Oh, who's that guy? I'll look up his research. Oh, I'll get him to come and speak here." And so there's these perverse incentives. And yeah, so that's, we got it wrong with COVID, and we're finally having a reckoning, but we didn't have the fuck up levy in place. Imagine how much we should have raised then. But I experience it every day in academia, in housing as well.
Yeah. Getting back to the Economist piece this week, if I had a critique of it, it would be that they're veering a little bit too much into this is a problem of some bad apples. But as the BMJ piece pointed out, it's not really a problem of bad apples. It's the whole expression is a few bad apples spoil the barrel, something like that. And it's really a problem of bad barrels and of rotten forests and orchards, as that article says. It's a system problem. It's not, this person who's just a bad person kind of problem. And
that's right.
Example one from the Economist piece that I wanted to give, one particular influential paper about the causes of Alzheimer's disease that appeared in the prestigious journal Nature and was cited over 2,000 times, caused billions of dollars to be directed into research on a particular protein or bunch of proteins called amyloid oligomers. It also led to trials to investigate an experimental drug. And it's clear now that everyone who was given that drug was facing unnecessary health risks associated with an experimental treatment with no possible benefit.
Amazing.
Yeah. And the second example, again, completely fake papers in cancer biology, where this is apparently just happening on a big scale, where someone takes a genuine paper and uses it as a template and just changes the gene or the protein or, just changes one thing in the paper. And these fake results go into the literature. They get cited by others. and it leads to drug development and clinical guidelines. And what the Economist piece points out is that means doctors have been giving advice to patients based on completely fake data. And what they say is that this is the tip of the iceberg, because they don't know all, like, the vast majority of the articles that are fake.
Wow.
And so it really does surprise me when you have big science communicators in the media, whether that's Norman Swan or Neil deGrasse Tyson in America, who won't engage with this reality. And it's interesting because Norman Swan, in his career, did do big pieces exposing medical fraud and research fraud in the past, a couple of decades ago, maybe. So yeah, I don't know, people, we'll link to it in the notes, the Economist piece, but also there's this clip that's been doing the rounds in YouTube of Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's an astronomer, admittedly not a medical guy, but he totally lost his temper with an interviewer asking pointed questions about the drip of revelations that show the mRNA vaccines, which I took 3 of them, that show these vaccines aren't as great as they were first touted to be, and that maybe it wasn't and isn't justified for everyone, even those with small risks, being forced to take them, or highly incentivized, shall we say, through employment and other things, to take them when they haven't really been fully studied. And Neil deGrasse Tyson basically exploded at this interviewer in exasperation, and he shouted something to the effect of, "We have a whole system in place to develop safe vaccines. What are you talking about?" And this is this very strange and unrealistic view of what this system is. As something that is without biases and without vested interests.
Look, you're totally right. And the funny thing is that this article came out in 2023. In 2005, John Ioannidis wrote an article that is called "Why Most Published Research Findings Are False." And he basically, he didn't explain fraud and whatnot. He basically just said, just being published doesn't mean that something's true, because there's a lot of false positives and there's publication bias, and therefore a lot of what gets there is accidentally wrong already. And that's the majority, right? And so if you now include what the Economist article is talking about, which is intentional fraud, it gives you a strong reason to be very cautious and take the opposite view to Neil deGrasse Tyson of, it's great to have a system in place, but we should keep improving it, and we should really still be skeptical until we see the evidence on the ground in practice somewhere, right? So I do find it odd, these experts sort of, it's like a self-referential thing. I trust myself because he did that article, and I trust his article, and we trust each other. But you can have this whole self-referential problem built on frauds or inadvertently wrong things. And that skeptical attitude, we just, there's just not enough of it around. And we saw that again, bringing up COVID. People like that feeling of certainty, I guess. So maybe that's part of the human nature dilemma to it all.
And we know that's the case about pharma, because these companies, the pharmaceutical companies, pay billions of dollars in fines for various types of fraud, including for falsifying clinical trial data. And that's published, like that's out there in the news from before COVID and for decades. So that's the system that he's yelling about as we have this system to develop safe vaccines, right? And
it's really bizarre how where he gets that confidence from, besides the social, where the experts stop questioning us, sort of, that social incentive. because anyone who can see the facts on the ground knows you should be skeptical of pharmaceutical companies, right? Because, like I said, about the homelessness organization, yeah, they don't really have an incentive to get rid of their customers, but neither do pharmaceuticals. There was a great quote by a Goldman Sachs analyst last year looking at biotechnology startups, and he said, "Is curing disease a sustainable business model?" and and everyone laughed, but he's just pointing out a true fact that's been true for many decades in pharmaceutical research, right?
Uh-huh. I don't know where I saw this, and I hope I'm not misremembering it, but it was about vaccine hesitancy, not vaccine hesitancy generally, but specifically for the COVID vaccines. It was highest among the poorest and those with PhDs.
Yeah,
Did,
that's
did
right.
you
No,
see?
yeah, I saw that survey. That came out quite early. And I do wonder if those PhDs, work in biotech labs and whatnot and realize that, a lot of this stuff is just being made up on the fly. And we're just crossing our fingers that it does the right thing. And there's a lot of bad incentives along the way.
And I have to say,
Yeah,
like
that's
on a, as
definitely
a
right.
personal reflection, like both my parents have PhDs, and I always remember getting from them whenever a member of the family went to the doctor, it was me or someone else, and there was always a sense of kind of, well, let's see what someone else thinks about this. Let's get a second opinion. Let's not just jump into the first, taking the first pills that were prescribed. There was always a sense of, well, let's assess these people, holistically. Does he seem to be phoning this
Yeah.
in? Like, does he really seem to be paying attention? Does he or she really seem to know what they're talking about? Let's get a second and third opinion before we do anything drastic.
Look, that makes a lot of sense, but it's very hard to train yourself to do that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have a PhD, and it took me a lot of time to generate that attitude of, do we really know that? Does that person really, like, you always write with confidence about what you know. All the experts do, right?
Mhm.
But you have to understand that all the experts contradict each other as well, so they can't all be right. There should be some humility there, and as an outsider, you should really take everything with a grain of salt, and reality check it wherever possible.
And yeah, just
Sure.
to sort of wind up on this theme, another example that we mentioned on an earlier episode is the ABC broadcaster who has his own podcast, Josh Seps, and he was proud to say that he was wrong about the vaccines, but wrong for the right reasons because he followed the science. But of course, we've just mentioned how I think that's a false trust. But the thing that I understand sort of where he's coming from, in the sense that if you can't trust something at some level, what do you have, right? So he
Mm-hmm.
scoffs at the idea of doing your own research, right? He's like, these all these people out there on the internet doing their own research.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really, if there's no space for doing your own research, if you want to use that phrase, meaning
Yeah.
critically examining a whole bunch of sources and so on, if nobody outside institutions, orthodox institutions, can do their own research without being scoffed at and told that they're an idiot, then you're scoffing at potentially the only way to expose,
Yeah.
fraud and falsehoods from a corrupt system. And I don't think that's a good idea.
No.
But I don't. But
Look,
I
and
understand
it,
where it comes from, because there's a sort of a need for, well, if you can't trust them, who can you trust? What have you got?
yeah, and that's exactly right. I think at the end of the day, people should be able to trust experts and scientists, right? That's sort of how we base our society and our, you go to the doctor because they're an expert and you're not, right? You get an engineer to make sure your building won't fall over because they're an expert and you're not. So we should do that, and I think the reckoning with inside academia, with inside the medical research community is, I think there needs to be a bit of more of a crisis before something changes. There's just so many economic incentives to keep playing the game, and
So publish or perish
maybe.
has to end. Like, you can't do that. You can't have that model of employment, right, in academia.
Look, I'm 100% with you, and I have a lot of strong views on peer review as well. So peer review obviously is, very self-referential. If you are trying to point out that someone's wrong, they're likely to review your academic paper and say, "No, let's not publish that." right? So wrong results can persist for a long time in the literature, and it's just so hard to get the truth to come out, because once this is in place, like that drug you were talking about, it's a fake drug. It gets cited. It gets developed into a therapy and a product, and now everybody along the line's got an interest in that science being correct. So the guy that points it out, right? It just cannot. Everybody wants to shut them down before the truth comes out. So I think you really need a big crisis and a big reckoning for that to happen. Whether the fuck up levy can engineer the right incentives, I don't know.
A question mark. We leave it hanging. Thank you for the discussion, Cameron, and see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks for the chat.